Coming to paperback and e-readers this February, Isis, Samurai Goddess. The goddess next door takes on kung fu killers in this action-packed martial arts Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Samurai Goddess in paperback and e-readers this February. A couple of days ago, I posted a picture of my new Isis series book, Isis, Samurai Goddess, in one of these African American fantasy groups in an effort to promote the new book that's coming in February. And I got a Facebook response from one of these individuals, these pro-black, back to Africa, red, black, and green Negroes, trying to take a dig at me regarding my comments about Nat Turner in several previous videos. Now, as everybody knows, I do not see Nat Turner as some sort of hero. When I look at the actions of Nat Turner, I do not see an individual who has acted in a way that was constructive to the struggles of the Negro during slavery. And this guy thought he's going to take a swipe at me while I'm trying to promote this book and thinking that this is a constructive action. Pretty much showing me that this individual has not learned anything regarding this Nat Turner. Now I'm going to take a moment in this video to explain why this Nat Turner was a failure and why his approach to leadership was not a model many of you African Americans need to see as something constructive. Now, when you look at your Nat Turner, yes, he led a slave rebellion, but he was not a good leader. A good leader is an individual who understands that with the position of leadership comes a lot of responsibility. And when you look at Nat Turner, he was only thinking about himself. He was not thinking about all the people who were slaves on those plantations. Moreover, he was not thinking about the free blacks who were also a part of that same community. All he was thinking about is he wanted to get this so-called white man, and he wanted to make this white man pay. In his mind, he was taking a stand, but as a leader, he was not looking out for the needs of those slaves, and he was not looking out for the needs of the free blacks in the circulating communities, and he was not looking out for white people in those communities. Whenever a leader goes to take an action, he has to follow the Bible and count the cost. Because your Nat Turner was supposed to be a minister, and he was supposed to be a man who was supposed to be well read in the Bible. And on the Bible, again, I believe it was Solomon who said, before you take an action, you have to count the cost. And when I look at your Nat Turner, he clearly did not count the cost when it came down to leading that slave rebellion. Because in leading that slave rebellion, he was not thinking about, one, the consequences of his actions, and two, the ramifications of his actions. All he was doing was being caught up in his emotions, caught up in how he felt about being enslaved, caught up in how he was feeling about being oppressed, and not thinking logically about the needs of the people in that slave camp and the free blacks around him and their needs to live. Because any smart leader would be thinking about the needs of those people, because a smart leader would say to himself, the needs of the many are more important than the needs of the few, because the needs of those many are going to have ramifications if I don't look out for those needs. Because if I don't look out for them, they're going to suffer because of my actions. And this is something your Nat Turner just did not think about. He sat there talking about he was going to lead this slave rebellion. He's going to go out here and kill all these white people. And again, his actions did more damage to the cause of black people than led to any benefits. Yes, he killed a whole bunch of white people, but he pretty much breathed all life into these stereotypes that many of these white supremacists and white racists had regarding the Negro. In their minds, the Negro was a savage, the Negro was a brute, the Negro was a monster. And here is Nat Turner leading his slave rebellion where he didn't kill white men. No. According to historical records, he killed women and children, further reinforcing the idea in these white racist and white supremacist minds that the Negro was a savage. And that's all he did. He reinforced it with that slave rebellion. And he led those black people to their demise. Because when we look at your Nat Turner, he pretty much sent all these black people out here to go kill white people with sticks and boards and all this stuff in the slave rebellion without a long-term goal, without looking out for their needs, without looking out for their safety. That's not what a leader does. If a leader takes an action, one, again, he assesses the cost, understanding that for his actions there are going to be equal and opposite reactions. Two, he understands that when he takes an action, there will be consequences for those actions. Three, he understands that he will have to deal with these consequences for those actions if he loses. And when he counts the cost, he assesses what is the loss versus what he will gain. And your Nat Turner, when we look at his slave rebellion, did not think about those costs and how what was to be benefited from this action versus what he was going to gain. Now, these pro-blacks and these hoteps and many of these other Afro-American Negroes will sit there and tell me that, your Nat Turner was fed up. And again, if this man is in a leadership position, he cannot be emotional. It is not about your feelings when you are a leader. When you are a leader, you are responsible for those people. You are responsible for making sure that they are being taken care of. You are responsible for making sure that their needs are going to be met. You are responsible for their safety. You are responsible for protecting and supporting those people, because when they act, when you tell them to act, you are responsible for their actions. And when I look at your Nat Turner's actions, he was only thinking about himself, and he sadly led those people down a road that pretty much cost them their lives. He was not thinking of the many, he was only thinking about himself. And that's why I do not see your Nat Turner as a hero, because any leader is going to look out for the needs of the many. He's going to understand that making sure that these brothers and sisters are safe, making sure that these brothers and sisters are protected, making sure that these brothers and sisters don't wind up dealing with the worst of the worst. Because if we take an action, there's going to be an equal and opposite reaction. And it's clear to me that your Nat Turner never thought about the equal and opposite reaction. You're going to go out here and tell these black men and these black women to go out here and kill these white people, and you're not going to think that there's going to be some sort of consequence behind it. Clearly, again, that's why I say this Nat Turner was mentally ill, because any logical thinking man is going to sit there and say, look, these white people have militias, these white people have weapons, these white people are not just going to let us go and do this without an equal and opposite reaction. And this guy clearly wasn't thinking that way. He was all caught up in his emotions. He was all caught up in his victimization. He was caught up in his feelings, but he wasn't thinking about the needs of those people and the needs of those other people in the community who were staying there. And if he had thought about that, he would have taken a different action, one that Harriet Tubman took, which was far more constructive. Because when we look at Harriet Tubman, she clearly counted the cost. She clearly thought about the consequences of her actions. And she clearly understood there would be an equal and opposite reaction from white racists, the paddle rollers, and many others in society. And she pretty much set up a strategy that would deal with these things in a constructive manner. Yes, she led the Underground Railroad, and the reason why the Underground Railroad was a success is because, sadly, your Harriet Tubman was more of a logical thinker and more of a tactical thinker than your Nat Turner. She wasn't caught up in her feelings. She was caught up in logic and reason. She understood that, again, for every action, there would be an equal and opposite reaction. She wasn't caught up in, I'm going to try to prove something to this imaginary white man in her head. She said it like this, in a logical way. Look, if I don't like the oppression on this plantation, then what we are going to do is we are going to leave the plantation. And once we leave the plantation, we're not coming back. This is why your Harriet Tubman was carrying a shotgun and threatening to kill any of these slaves, because she knew that many of these slaves who got scared would be wanting to go back home, reminiscing about all the master's cornbread, the master's biscuits, and because this slave would want the master's cornbread and the master's biscuits, they would run and go tell about this Underground Railroad. So I believe Harriet Tubman pretty much had to use that shotgun on many of these dysfunctional Negroes because, again, this is how things were done. You say you want off this plantation, we're going to go off this plantation. This is not about I have something to prove to this white man. This is about I want out of this situation. And this is the big difference between your Nat Turner and your Harriet Tubman. This is why your Harriet Tubman was a success and your Nat Turner was a failure. Because your Nat Turner was caught up in his ego, he was caught up in his emotions. He was going to prove something to this white man, not understanding that when in his quest to prove something to this white man, he was giving the whites power over him. And that's what led to him being overtaken and his whole rebellion being crushed in less than 2 days. But when we look at your actions again of your Nat Turner, again, we see that he was not a real leader because, again, a leader looks out for the needs of his people. He looks out for the safety of his people. And what does Nat Turner do after he murders one white woman? He runs out into the woods. That's not a leader. A leader looks out for the needs of his people, looks out for the safety of his people, looks to protect his people, and makes sure that when he sets a goal to do something, he makes sure that his people do not lose. Your Nat Turner ran into the woods and hid for 3 weeks. How was that looking out for his people? How was that looking out for his safety? Yeah, he led a rebellion to get the attention of white people, but at the end of the day, all he did was cost black people the little freedoms that they had because those free blacks, a lot of them were killed in the massacre afterward. A lot of the slaves were killed in the massacres afterward by these white racist militias. And then after that, after Nat Turner was tried, convicted, and executed, these white racists then started creating legal policies to further oppress the other blacks in those slave areas to prevent them from doing things like learning how to read and write. They were more oversaw by patrollers and overseers. And there was further oppression with federal laws like the Fugitive Slave Law. So when we look at your Nat Turner from a panoramic perspective, we look at him and again, we see a failure of leadership because this guy just was all about him. He was not thinking about the needs of the many. He was thinking about only himself and saving his ego of getting some white people. We're not thinking about the bigger picture as it related to black people. Now, I'm hoping this is the last video I ever have to do about this Nat Turner because when it comes down to this issue, it seems like these pro-blacks and these hoteps seem to revere this guy as some sort of hero, and they think that this guy was doing something constructive for them. They don't understand that there is a way to take a stand. And when you take a stand, again, people who want to stand up for something understand what they're standing up for, why they're standing up for it, and they clearly assess the cost of what they are standing up for. They understand the consequences that are going to come from taking that stand, and they're really ready to deal with the consequences of taking that stand. And when you look at Nat Turner, he was not ready to deal with any of that. He had an idea in his head of an imaginary situation of getting some white folks, but he didn't think about the needs of the many black folks who would be left behind in the aftermath. Now, I finally hope that this is all I have to say about this video, and you can comment, rate, and subscribe.